I'm James, and this is my bedtime, so I'm not going to be talking forever. Um, so I'm James. I'm a person in recovery. I've been out of active addiction for 2 years and almost 6 months. Um, I'm glad this isn't like technically an NA meeting so that I can talk about other sort of outside issues. I'm definitely going to be talking about mental health, medication, harm reduction, alternative recovery practices, because those are all part of my story, definitely. So I was born in 1981, which put me at a very impressionable age when abstinence education, the Just Say No program became a thing. And I remember being like 7 or 8 years old and being like indoctrinated with this like really like super oversimplified anti-drug messages that are just basically that like drugs are bad, don't do them. They'll fuck your heads up and like ruin your lives, and you're gonna put your babies in microwaves and all that crap. And it I feel like later in life that really did me a disservice, because even as little kids, we know when we're being lied to. And I, as a teenager, ended up with a very like a ridiculous curiosity and craving of knowledge about drugs and what drugs did and what drugs were like. I remember my friend who could get weed. I was always begging him, like, can you get me heroin? Can you get me coke? Like, those are things like I was like 14 at this time. And like, I was like really just overly curious about what these things were like, because we had never gotten any sort of real education on it. And I feel like the sense of having been like that we didn't have all the information like made me really curious about that stuff. I also, at a very young age, started showing signs of sort of mental health issues. I grew up in a kind of non-traditional family that there was no like abuse or anything, but it was a little dysfunctional. And I started showing signs of depression at a young age, which I went into therapy for, and they started trying to put me on medication, which I was very reluctant to do. When I got to college, I started smoking weed when I was like 14, 15. It was something that like my parents they sort of felt like they'd rather have me safe at home smoking than going out and being unsafe like in the streets. Like some of my friends were, their parents would kick them out when they were doing bad things, whatever, and they'd get in a lot of trouble with the law, doing dangerous stuff, like hanging out with really dangerous people. Whereas my dad was like, I'd rather have you like safe in your room smoking weed where I know where you are and be safe, which I felt like was looking back, I really appreciate him for that. But when I got to college, I went to art school, and lots of other things, lots of other drugs sort of reared their heads, things that I had always been curious about. Like I tried pretty much everything else. I had a bit of a meth hobby for a little bit, which actually like my grades totally went up. I got a lot more homework done and my room was much cleaner. Luckily that didn't go on very long. It was a time in my life where I could pick up and put down whatever I wanted, which looking back, like I wish that I could still be like that, but unfortunately not anymore. I was introduced to cocaine, which was a fairly regular thing, as I was like quite a club goer, doing lots of coke, going to clubs, partying quite a bit. But again, it was something I could put down and it was completely sustainable. It wasn't getting in the way of my life. It wasn't getting in the way of school or my work or anything else. I started working, I was working mostly retail, looking for something else. Like I really wanted something that was more of a career. And at some point, a friend of mine, we were out one night and he says to me, you know what, like I'm moving to Oregon. You should take my job. You would really like it. And I said, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm working at the syringe exchange. I was living in Philly at that time. And I was like, syringe exchange? I feel like I've heard of that. This was in like 2002. And I had heard of it because my dad, who's gay, was involved with ACT UP in the 80s. And syringe exchange really got started around with ACT UP and like sort of similar underground groups. And I sort of had vaguely heard of it and always thought of it. It was just like a totally like underground guerrilla situation, like people like illegally like transporting syringes and like giving them, whatever. I thought it was like a totally underground thing. And he was like, no, we actually have a legit syringe exchange in Philadelphia. And I do it, that's my job. Like, you should come check it out. So I went, and I ended up getting the job. And it was amazing. We were technically federally illegal, but legal in Philadelphia, because we had the mayor had declared a state of emergency because the HIV rate had been so high in the late 90s. So he declared a state of emergency, which made the syringe exchange legal, just in Philadelphia. And it was a really incredible, eye-opening situation for me. Like, I felt super worldly, and like I knew everything, and like I knew what drug users were like, and I knew what drugs were and whatever. And it was like a whole different world, a whole different universe. And I learned so much about people in general. And of course, so much more about drug use. So that syringe exchange being harm reduction, which is something that like I really grew up with, not even knowing what it was called, not even knowing there was a term for it. Like, the fact that my dad had been like, listen, like, if you're going to do things like smoke weed, I want you to be at home and safe when you do them. That's harm reduction. So I was really brought up with this sort of background, so it wasn't really hard. It wasn't really a leap for me when I started working at the syringe exchange to espouse these beliefs. It was great. Like, we gave out not just clean syringes, but we had all kinds of paraphernalia. We had like alcohol pads, clean tourniquets, clean cookers, like everything people needed to stay safe. And we also had social workers to help people get into housing, which of course like is a major problem for people who are using drugs. Most of our clients were people who were living on the street or in like abandos and whatnot. So we had a housing program, which was awesome. And social workers who could actually help people get into treatment if that's what they were interested in. But as a harm reduction program, we didn't push people into treatment. Like, we never expected people to get into treatment. We never asked people to get into treatment. But if they were interested in it, we would help them out. And we had a lot of good ins with the city that we could help people kind of get through the red tape and actually get in when they wanted to. Because a lot of us know how hard it is, even when you're really ready to go, sometimes to find a place to get into and do it. So through my time at Prevention Point, the syringe exchange, I was still using drugs of all types in again, still very sustainable fashion. I believe that drugs are and can be and should be fun and therapeutic. And at the time, like, they were a lot of fun and in some ways very therapeutic for me. Like, my depression was still a problem. And I found that drugs could help me medicate that. I was having the beginnings of mania, of manic depression, and I could find that I could medicate myself for that as well. I, for some reason, was really wary of actual pharmaceutical drugs and really kind of scared to go back to therapy. I'd had really bad experiences with it as a kid, and I found medicating myself really seemed to work a lot better at the time. And I was managing it very well. It wasn't getting in the way of work or life or relationships. In 2005, I took a brief leave of absence to have an elective surgery. Even before the surgery happened, the doctor prescribed me, a ridiculous amount of painkillers. There was like, I guess I shouldn't name them all to trigger anybody, but it was like multiple different kinds of painkillers, pills, and heaps of them. And so I was like, wow, this is probably really going to hurt. I'm going to be miserable. Like, the surgery actually wasn't that bad, but I was away from home. I was living in Philly at the time. I'm from DC. I came back to DC for the surgery. And so I was away from my friends, away from where I was used to hanging out, whatever, recovering from surgery, bored out of my mind. And I was basically just eating these painkillers for fun. I was super depressed, being away from my friends for several weeks. And yeah, had a major depressive episode and was just starting to eat these pills for fun and make myself feel better. And that, I believe, was the start of my problems. Because when I came back to work and the pills had run out, I was like, well, you know what? Like, I can totally just buy heroin and, just use that occasionally. Well, that's what I did. And that I see someone says, I'm from PG County. Yeah, I'm from Greenbelt. Anyway, so I started buying heroin occasionally. I would buy like a bag a week, if that, sometimes less, maybe every 2 weeks, and it would last. I was only snorting it. I was using with friends. It was very social, and still sustainable. And that went on for quite a while, until some like really fucked up shit happened at my job. And this is a whole other story that I might get to, but my boss ended up making some shit up about me because she didn't like me and got me fired. And it like wrecked me, because I loved that job. I loved that job so much. Like, it was my personality. It was like my whole reason for being. I loved my clients. I loved my work and what I did. And I was so upset to be pushed out like that over some bullshit. And I was really hurt by it. So I ended up super depressed with nothing to do. I was on unemployment, so I had money, and my use kind of really got out of control. Started to get out of control. I started not leaving the house. Like, I lost my relationship that I was in. I wasn't looking for work. I was basically just getting high. And that was, yeah, the beginning of about 15 years of terror. So over time, I don't want to get too much into like details of the story, but over time, like, there was multiple times where I went into that I felt like, I know, like, things are bad and I have to stop. Like, I definitely have to stop. Because the drugs were no longer fun or therapeutic. Like, it was just miserable. Like, I just was living this daily, like, just get up, hustle, score, get high, and you rinse and repeat over and over again. And that was it. There was no fun. There was no therapy for the drugs anymore. So I started trying occasionally to get clean. And I felt like all I need is like 3 days of detox, like, and then, but I'll be fine. I can do this on my own. So I'd go into the hospital, I'd go through like a medically advised detox, and then just come out, like, not go to rehab or anything, because it was like, I don't really need to be away that long. Like, I'll be fine. Like, I can do this. And of course that never worked, because the problem is, like, I was so used to, at that point, so used to the daily of, like, part of not just the drug itself, but just being used to getting up and hustling and scoring. Like, that was like what I do. Like, what else do I have to do? I was kind of like, in a really sick way, like, as much as it was like wrecking me, I kind of was enjoying the ripping and running. And like the mystery of, like, what am I going to end up doing today? Although it was the same shit over and over again, but it was like, dumb escapades, whatever, shenanigans. So yeah, multiple times I went into detoxes and rehabs, 7-day rehabs, never more than that. And I remember the first time I was in a state-run rehab, which was really, really dank and dungeony. They brought in what was supposed to be a 12-step meeting. I don't remember if it was AA or NA, but we were obligated to go to it. It was mandatory. And I was not interested, but I had to go. And it basically was a Bible. It was like two guys, two really scary big dudes with Bibles. And they came in and they started reading, like, I don't know, fucking, I'm Jewish. I don't know. It was Bible shit they were reading. And I was really mad about it, because I knew enough to know that 12-step is not supposed to be religion. It's not supposed to be like any particular God shit, whatever. Like, and also I was like, this is a state-run facility. This is especially fucked up. And I just was not interested in it. And like, when you try and force someone, like, try and force someone to recover, and like, we just dig in harder. Like, I'm not ready for this. Like, I'm not going to fucking do it. And if you're in my face about it, like, well, fuck you. I'm not going to do it even harder. And it was terrifying. And these guys basically told me that since I was Jewish and wasn't going to accept Jesus as my personal savior, then I was destined to die with a rig in my arm. And I decided right then and there, fuck 12-step. I'm never going back to this. So, time goes by, more and more, like, more getting high, more rehabs, more detoxes. I got to a point where I was doing shit that, like, really fucked with my own personal morals. Like, I feel like I have a different set of, like, morals and ethics than a lot of the world, in that, like, I have no problem with, like, if you're hungry and you need food and you need to steal food, like, fucking steal food. Like, I have no problem with that. I, at some points in college, was doing sex work just to support myself and for fun. Like, I thought it was great that I could, like, be working for myself and, like, on my own time and make money, like, with the, you know, completely renewable resource of my body. And I was really into it. But I had rules, like I had boundaries for myself, things that I would and wouldn't do. And I was like really on top of that. But I started with my addiction doing fucked up things that were completely against even my own ethics. Like I wasn't just stealing from like Kmart, I was stealing from friends. I wasn't doing, like I was doing sex work stuff that I wasn't like comfortable with, that I wouldn't have allowed myself to do before because I was desperate. So I was like breaking my own rules. Like I didn't really care so much about society's rules, but the fact that I was breaking my own rules was what really hurt me. Like when I started stealing from my girlfriend, from my sister, constantly. I was constantly taking my sister's ATM card in the middle of the night. And robbing friends, breaking into friends' apartments and shit like that. And was like, this is not like, this is not stealing food from Kmart. This is like robbing people that I care about and taking things that are irreplaceable. And that's when I started like, it just made the depression and way worse. Which of course then I had to medicate even more. So I guess it was 2008. I was in a state that I was like so depressed and desperate. And I just was like, I found myself like praying that something bad would happen to me. And I got hit by a car, broke my back and landed me in the hospital for 2 weeks. Now I was in the trauma center and, you know, hooked up to the morphine button and everything. And I still needed drugs because it wasn't enough to like even like the maximum amount of morphine they would give me wasn't enough to like stop my cravings or like keep me well. I had been using so much heroin at that point, like they couldn't give me enough morphine, and also just like the craving of doing the drugs and like making the runs and stuff. And I remember like unconnecting myself from everything and trying to get up to go cop, and my dad just like, my dad was so upset. He was there and he was like, you can't, like your fucking back is broken. You can't be wandering the streets. Like, and I like begged him to go cop for me and he did. And I never felt so fucking low in my life. And I know like some people, like, I don't always tell this story because like because I don't want anyone getting mad at my dad for being an enabler, because he just didn't know what else to do in the time. Like I was so desperate and begging him so hard, and like he just really didn't know what to do. And I managed to talk him into that, and like that's my fault. And like I get upset that people get like mad at him for it, but it was all me, you know. And I felt like such a piece of shit for like how low I'd gotten. But anyway, another year or two went by of like all this same shit going on. And I finally, like, I had broken into the people downstairs from us. I lived with my sister, and I broke into the apartment downstairs, who we were kind of friends with, and I stole a bunch of their shit. And they were going to call the cops on me, so I got on a bus and came back to Greenbelt, where I'm from, to DC, to live with my dad, and he was going to clean me up. But he was an alcoholic. So like his idea of helping me, and like he was doing the best he could, like he didn't know any better, was like to just like keep me like drunk through withdrawals so that I wouldn't go back to using heroin. Part of the thing was like being in DC, like at least I wouldn't know where to go. It wouldn't be easy for me to pick up drugs. So yeah, so we basically, like, I ended up with alcohol poisoning the first couple of days I was here, and did manage to kick dope though. But I cured my heroin addiction with alcoholism. I spent the next several years just drinking myself into oblivion constantly with my dad. Like the two of us were totally like sad together. He'd always had also problems with depression, and he was narcoleptic, and he had all these health problems, and like he was retired and on full disability from the military, so he didn't have to do anything. We basically would just go to the Legion and drink all day and all night, and then come home and drink at home, you know, until morning. And at some point I started, before I left Philly, I started shooting coke occasionally. When I was here in DC, like I got this craving to start shooting coke again, and I couldn't find coke anywhere, so I ended up smoking crack. And that was it, man. Like that was just from that moment to like for the next 8 years, like all it was just crack. I had done my first full 30-day rehab for alcohol. Um, well, I went in there saying like I just had an alcohol problem. I didn't tell anybody about the crack at all. I went to a place called Father Martin's up in Northern Maryland, a really nice place, really, really nice place. It was way nicer than anywhere I'd ever been before. Places I'd been before were like really shitty. They treat you like ass. Like there's no comfort at all. And I just was really sick of those places because I feel like just because you're on drugs doesn't mean you need to be treated like shit. And I was really resented it. So to go somewhere that was like comfortable and the employees and staff like treated me like a human, like really, really opened my eyes and made a difference. So I came out of Father Martin's and I did pretty well for a while. I went to an IOP. And I didn't drink or touch a drug for probably, I think it was 3 months, 3 to 4 months, which was a huge deal for me because I'd never gone more than for, several years since 2005. I hadn't gone more than a day without drugs or alcohol. But I eventually started drinking again. I thought that I could just have a drink and it would be okay. But it never was. It never was. It went back very quickly. Anyway. I lost relationships, like I wasn't employable. I was living on my grandfather's couch. I didn't really have anything going for me. And I ended up, I moved to Houston with a woman who I had lied to and told her I was in recovery at that point. I had been going to meetings here. And I was like never really completely clean. I might get a few days clean, but I didn't tell anyone this. And I'm sure people realized it. It was probably obvious. But I met this woman and I told her I was in recovery and she didn't notice that I wasn't really in recovery. And we ended up moving to Houston together. And it was great because I was like, all right, I feel like this is a new start. Like I don't know where to buy drugs here. So that'll be helpful, right? At least. And we were together all the time, so there was really no chance for me to like get away and use whatever. She ended up having to go out of town for 2 weeks first for work. I went to a meeting one day and I didn't know what the neighborhoods were like. Like I didn't know where bad neighborhoods or good neighborhoods were, so I just picked a random meeting and it turned out it was like in the middle of Crackville. And of course, instantly my brain's going like, well, at least now I know where to get it. Like, and it'll be fine. Like I can totally get one. And I ended up spending the next 6 months in Houston on the worst. It was just a nonstop crack binge the whole time. And going through like $60,000 that wasn't even mine. She finally, when she realized what was going on, kicked me out, threatened to call the cops, and I came back to DC. I drove back from Houston, managing to get high in every major city. I stopped in New Orleans, I got high. I stopped in Charlotte, North Carolina, I got high. In Atlanta, I got super high, driving the whole way home. And I was back on my grandfather's couch, not knowing what to do. Sorry, this is going on too long. Anyway, my dad died. And I felt like, well, that's a whole other story. Anyway, so I met this new girl who I actually known in high school, sort of. And we started hanging out and going out. And I did the whole thing where I pretended I was in recovery. Like as far as she knew, I was doing well and whatever. And it soon became pretty obvious that like things were not good. Anyway, like I dicked around and fucked around, and so many times, like she threatened to leave, and I would get better for a while. And I went to another long-term, like a 28-day rehab. And it was another kind of shitty place in Annapolis. And I just like don't understand like why there's this like pervasive idea in rehabs that like if you treat people like shit, they'll get better. I just don't understand like what the fuck that's about. Anyway, it didn't go well. I came home, and I finally went 2.5 years ago. I went to a place called RCA, and it was right after like a really like the worst crack binge I'd been on. Like my wife's dad, I had gotten married. My wife's dad was dying of cancer, and she was up in Baltimore with him. And as soon as she left for Baltimore, instead of being like worried about him, worried about her, my first thought was like, wow, I can get high tonight, like all night without having to worry about her being here. And it turned into like a 5-day binge, like nonstop, round the clock. And at some point she came home and told me her dad had died. And I was so high, I had no idea what was going on. And this just went on for another couple of days. She was staying in Baltimore. And finally, I remember like I had no money and I didn't know what the fuck to do. Like I couldn't afford any more crack. I couldn't even buy alcohol because I had no money. So I was going to the grocery store and stealing cooking wine to drink, which like that shit's gross. It's full of salt. It's pretty nasty, but it was all I could do. And I just remember like standing here in the kitchen and calling one of my friends who was in the program and just being like, can you take me to the hospital? And my wife had called her actually already and said, could you get a hold of James and try and take him? And Karen was like, I mean, I can't force him to go. And like through some sort of like divine intervention, like I called Karen and I said, can you take me somewhere? Because I'm sick as fuck and I can't do this anymore. And I just don't want to be like this. And she took me to the hospital. And I thought I was dying because I was like throwing up black shit. And I hadn't slept in days. And I was like, yeah, the drugs were so damaging to me at that point. Like there was no thought of even fun. It never felt good. It didn't feel good at all. Like I was one of those cracked heads who would just hide in a closet the whole time I was using. There was never any fun moments to it. And yeah, so I told Karen, I was like, she took me to the hospital and they kept me there for a few days to medically stabilize me because I was in such a mess. And then I ended up, my wife wouldn't talk to me at all, which was terrifying to me. Because that was like, part of me was like, I just want to like get out of the hospital and go back home and have everything be better. Well, it was never going to just be better. So I had a bunch of friends who I'd been friends with, and because I had been going to NA meetings, even though I told myself years ago I never would. Because even though I didn't really fully buy into the 12-step dogma, at least going to meetings was kind of fun. And I found a couple meetings that had people that I liked that weren't really pushy and over the top, like NA Nazis. So I had these couple of friends who were like really pushing for me. While I was in the hospital, they made a lot of phone calls trying to find a place for me to go for 28 days. So I ended up at this place called RCA, which was really amazing. It was, I mean, in a beautiful place, but it also had staff that was really empathetic and caring and treated me like a person. And I feel like it was a combination of things at that point that was like, it was fine. I was finally ready. And like the stars were just aligned perfectly and it worked that time. And I came out of there like really aware that I had probably lost everything, like that my wife was going to leave, that my family was done with me. But I came out of there like feeling like I'm not going to fucking use them anymore. One of the major things that happened to me that I feel like really saved my ass when I was in RCA was they had a psychiatrist who was like the shit. She was amazing. And within a few minutes of being with her, she diagnosed me as bipolar. We talked a lot about when I would use certain drugs and why. And she said, you know, it sounds a lot like self-medication. And I said, well, no shit. She put me on a medication. She put me on Seroquel, like a lot. A lot of people are used to taking a little bit of Seroquel for sleep, but it's actually an antipsychotic and it's good anti-manic medication. And part of the problem with the mania, especially for me, is that it leads to impulsiveness, like extreme impulsiveness. Like there was a problem with me was even when I didn't want to use, I couldn't help it. Like as soon as I thought of it, I had to have it. So she put me on Seroquel because it's great to help with mania and bipolar in general. And I found that like the medication like really helped. Like finally being properly medicated with something that wasn't an illicit substance was incredibly helpful for me. And I really, I since then have changed medications, but it's still on a proper medication for bipolar and mania. And it keeps me from being so impulsive, and it keeps me from being so obsessive and compulsive. And I feel like medication for me has been a lifesaver. Um, I also like, as much as in the years, but like in the early years of my addiction, had been so mad at the God stuff. I found like I really came back to my own like Jewish roots, and I got a lot more involved with a local synagogue, and I found a rabbi who was like incredibly sympathetic, and I could talk to a lot, and she brought me a lot of comfort. It gave me a lot of things to think about, and she was one of the few people I talked to a lot when I was in rehab, actually, because a lot of other people wouldn't take my phone calls. Anyway, I say this, I'm thinking now of like, I'm trying to think of the points I wanted to make sort of along the way. And one of them that was like, I know in 12-step programs, we say that religion, medication, and psychiatry haven't worked for us. I found that like, those are the three things that have worked best for me. And I think that it's important for people to hear stories in meetings of people who have found help outside of the rooms that has worked. Because I feel like a lot of times I don't want to sound like I'm bashing NA or 12-step, but I feel like a lot of times the message is that like, this is the only way. And I want people to know it's not the only way. There are other ways out there for people. And like, there's other kinds of recovery. There's other meetings. There's smart recovery, which was amazing for me for a while. It's very sciencey, which really works for some people as like a complete opposite of 12-step. And then there's like this Buddhist recovery group, which I can't remember the name of suddenly. And there's other options. And I feel like there's a lot of people who are self-medicating, for whom like proper therapy and like actual like good medication can really help cut down on the craziness that makes us use. Another thing that I feel like is really important is the harm reduction piece. That like, the fact that like I'm so lucky that I worked at the syringe exchange before I became an IV drug user, because it was instilled in me like to always use as safely as possible, and to like not share needles. Like, of all the grody things that I've ever done, like I've never shared a needle. I might have reused my own a few times, but like it kept me safe and, you know, safer and alive and healthy long enough to get better. And I think that it's important to understand that like, not everyone's ready to get clean, and if people are going to use, they need to do it safely to keep them alive. And that's a lot of why some of you may recognize me as the guy who advertises Narcan on the Dopey page a lot. I work in harm reduction again now. I work at the DC syringe exchange. And so I have access to free Narcan, and I'm allowed to just give it out to whoever. I mean, we give it out here in DC, but then I take a lot home and like mail it to people around the country who can't get it. And lately I've also gotten fentanyl test strips, because I feel like it's important to keep people alive, as you know, to the point where they can do better, whatever better means. Like, any positive change is a good thing in harm reduction. Let's see what else. Yeah, so life hasn't been all a bowl of cherries. Like, things are always still difficult, you know, but I don't feel compelled to use. I didn't think I felt like I would always have this like need in me to use. Like, even when I was clean for, you know, periods of time, like it was always at the back of my mind. It was always something that I wanted to do. It was always something that I looked at as like, oh, I wish I could do this. And I totally don't feel that way now. The combination of things in my life that have come together to work to make this happen, like I don't feel compelled. I don't feel cravings. And I'm blessed now that when I think about using, because I do still think about using, but I don't think about it in any sort of positive way. Like, I automatically think of the bad things and how horrible it was and how it wasn't any fun and it wasn't therapeutic and all the bad places it took me to. And it's very, very easy to decide not to use now. I'm also like I said, I got married in active addiction, but I'm still married. My wife came back to me after a while. once I came out of rehab, she had moved back into her old place. So we weren't living together, but after a couple of months, she moved back in with me. And things have been pretty good ever since. We have a kid now. We have an 11-month-old baby who, knock on wood, will never ever see me high or drunk. And I feel like there's hope. Am I going through some shit? Yeah, like my depression is back a bit, and I feel like it has a lot to do with COVID, because I'm generally a very social person, and I haven't been able to do the things that nourish my soul. Like I spend a lot of time at my synagogue. I didn't really realize how much time I spend there until I couldn't go. I feel like super disconnected from my community, and it's causing some depression problems, which is difficult. But again, I don't feel the need to self-medicate. I feel like I had so many points that I wanted to make sure and make, and now I've been rambling for a while. But yeah, I feel like there's as many ways to get clean as there are people who use, and that it doesn't always have to be NA or AA. There's a lot of other options out there for people, and I feel like it's important to be open and welcoming. I feel like there's a lot of sentiment of like, if I had to go through it, if I had to go through this hard, then you have to go through it hard too. And I feel like we all just need to be more accepting of each other's path. Anyway, I guess I'm going to stop there because I feel like I'm rambling. But I do love a good question and answer period. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. And I'm also just happy to hear if anyone else has anything to say. So.